A lot of the last year has been spent talking about and spilling ink over this complex relationship between the U.S. and China. You devote part of your book, which you wrote with Carol Ann Brown, to this relationship. You wrote about how the erection of trade barriers, imposing limits, for example, on the sale of goods across borders, has the potential to threaten U.S. leadership in technology. I'd like to hear more about your concerns about the way this is playing out between the U.S. and China and what impact that could have on U.S. technological leadership on a global arena.
The U.S. is the digital technology leader in the world today, but I think one of the important things for all of us to remember is that we don't actually invent or create technology by ourselves. If you buy an American technology product, a product that is made by an American company, in all probability it consists of inventions that came from Silicon Valley as well as Bangalore and Beijing and Dublin and London, Toronto and Melbourne and the like. We need to continue that. If we were to try to construct a new digital iron curtain down the middle of the Pacific, in all probability we would hold ourselves back rather than hold someone else back. We need to keep that in mind.
But there are some concerns that are probably valid concerns about the transfer of intellectual property across borders, concerns that the U.S. has raised about national security. What happens when there's theft of intellectual property on the part of the other party? Your book is not just about outlining the problems, but you've suggested some solutions. One in particular has to do with allowing for the transfer of goods and IP, but with limits. Can you talk a little bit about what that might look like and how in practice we can ensure safety, national security, but at the same time allow for this kind of much freer trade?
I think that phenomenon is in part what makes this so complex. Of course, there are important national security and intellectual property implications that need to be thought through, that need to be addressed. We will, in all probability, have a new generation of technology export control rules in the United States. That's sensible. But they're going to need to work differently from the way they've worked in the past. In sensitive areas, technology that could have more important military uses, for example. You're still dealing with technology that may have important civilian uses as well, so-called dual uses. We'll need a regulatory regime that focuses on how the technology is being used, who the users are. Only by doing that can we protect national security while promoting economic competitiveness. And similarly with intellectual property, we need controls to protect IP, but we have to strike the right balance. In short, the nuances really matter.
Do we have the global infrastructure in place? A lot of people are talking about how the trade system internationally is broken. Do we have the institutions like the WTO that could implement these kinds of changes and reforms that you're referring to?
I think one of the things we talk about in our book is the need for a new generation of multilateral and really multi-stakeholder initiatives. We need to learn from the past. That's one of the points that we've made. It's one of the reasons that we draw on historical stories. The 20th century moved forward because of institutions in part like the WTO. Clearly, there are new strains, there are new pressures, there's much more dissatisfaction with the global trading system today. But even as we do recognize the shortcomings, we need to build, and build by bringing governments and companies together. We probably will need some new institutions to help us through this. But we're going to serve ourselves best by focusing on what's broken and not breaking what's fixed. And that's part of the balance we think the world needs to strike.
Part of your discussion focuses on the different ways U.S. consumers and Chinese consumers use technology, and you have some interesting and colorful examples. Can you talk a little bit more about how technology is used differently in the two countries and why that matters to our relationship with China?
It really does matter, and I think you make an excellent point. It goes to the multifaceted nature of the U.S.-Chinese technology relationship. On the one hand, there are frustrations that American companies have about a lack of market access, and I think those are legitimate frustrations, as we describe. But at the same time, we shouldn't overlook the fact that there are times when Chinese consumers simply have different preferences. This is true of many populations around the world. A market tends to favor companies that address the different interests that consumers have. We've seen this at Microsoft, as we share in the book. There's a wonderful innovation that we created in China called Giles. It's a chatbot. It's widely used by hundreds of millions of people in China. Bringing it to the United States led to some surprising challenges. And the same is true vice versa. I think you can look at the challenges that a company like Amazon or a company like Google has had in China, and part of it, at least, relates to formidable local competitors that moved in some ways in a different direction to meet the tastes of Chinese users.